Once Socrates is found guilty of the charges against him, the trial proceeds to the next stage, in which each side proposes a penalty, and then it is voted upon. Meletus proposes death. Now, historians believe that Meletus probably didn't really want to kill him. He just wanted Socrates to either stop annoying him or go away. Now, Socrates being Socrates, he first proposes this. He says he should be put up at the expense of the state in the Prytaneum. What is the Prytaneum? Well, it was a reward given to those who won the prize, essentially at the Olympics, and and perhaps a horse race or chariot race. And so, why should he be put up in this, receive this greatest reward? Well, he says that an Olympian gives the mere appearance of happiness, and that he, Socrates, gives the reality of happiness, which, as you might imagine, would be this response is terribly insulting to them, because they essentially said, you're guilty, and Meletus says death, and he says back, I'm doing such a great job. Not only should I not be put to death, but I should be treated as an Olympic hero. Then, at the urging of his friends, seeing how things are going pretty badly, he offers to pay a small fine, a mina, and his friends, quickly, pull the money together and say, he should pay more. They'll pay quite a bit more money, and so he makes that offer to them. Now, perhaps they were considering accepting it, perhaps not, but then Socrates pushes them. Rather than being, repentant and remorseful, what he does is says to them this. He says he would rather die speaking the way he speaks than speak in their manner and live. And he notes, correctly, there are ways of escaping death if one is willing to say and do anything. The difficulty, he asserts, is not avoiding death, but to avoid unrighteousness. And unrighteousness runs faster than death. And using the running analogy, he says that he's old and moves slowly, so the slower runner hasn't overtaken him, that of death. His accusers are quick, and the faster runner, unrighteousness, has overtaken them. Now, obviously, the analogy breaks pretty quickly, because if unrighteousness is a really fast runner, that would obviously overtake the slow Socrates quickly. But, I guess kind of go with the metaphor. So, he departs to suffer the penalty of death. They go their way, condemned by truth, to suffer the penalty of their villainy and wrongdoing. Now, he makes a prophecy, and he claims that in the hour of death, a person is gifted with prophetic power. And he claims that his murderers will be punished. Now, it turns out that Socrates is right. The accusers all come to bad ends. So how did Socrates predict this so effectively? Well, the obvious answer is in a way kind of like, in power, you could say hindsight, that when Plato wrote the dialogue, he already knew what happened. You could also say that Socrates, knowing how, these people, that they would probably come to a bad end. Now, he notes that they killed him, or they have sentenced him to death, because they wanted to escape the accusations against them and not give an account of their lives. But he contends that by killing people, they cannot prevent the censure of their own evil lifestyles. This is neither possible nor honorable. And the easiest and noblest way to avoid being censured for being evil is not harming others, but improving oneself. Or so Socrates claims. Now, this also raises an important question in ethics and political philosophy. Should a leader who is, or someone in power or position of authority who is, bad, corrupt, should they respond to criticism by, trying to silence and harm those who would dare criticize them or call them out? Or should they instead become better people? Now, once again, obviously someone who is corrupt and bad and powerful, who is exploiting and harming others, they're probably not going to want to give that up. And so they would probably prefer to silence and harm others rather than give it up. But Socrates' view is one of ethics, that the right thing to do is not to harm others, to silence their just criticism, but to improve oneself, to be a better person. Now, Socrates, kind of interesting point about him, is that Socrates heard a voice in his head telling him to do things. Now, we typically hear about people hearing voices that tell them to do bad things. But the people who hear voices telling them to do good things, we generally don't hear about. You don't hear about in the news, person told by inner voice to be kind and to help people. News at 11. We generally, of course, hear about the people who hear voices and do terrible things. And this may seem somewhat odd, but hearing voices that tell you to do like good things is actually surprisingly common throughout history. And Socrates is one of the famous people who heard voices or a voice telling him to do good things. So his voice, what he called his internal oracle, kept him from error. And, whenever he was going to do something incorrect, it would essentially tell him, not to do that. Kind of the voice of his conscience and his moral reasoning, one could say. And he claims, since his internal oracle, the voice in his head, didn't tell him to stop talking. And so he believes that he's doing the right thing because his voice didn't say anything to him, didn't tell him to stop. So Socrates is sentenced to death. So what happens next? Well, he sees that his friends are distraught, and he's going to try to argue that one should not fear death.